Webster's defines a monster as a being of unnatural or extreme ugliness, deformity, wickedness, or cruelty. Going off of that definition, you could say that there are monsters all around us. We all know people that we deem to be monsters. We all fear certain monsters. Some of us looked up to great and inspiring figures who later turned out to be monsters. Some of us were raised by monsters. Some of us were raised to be monsters. We see them and we judge them based on our own sense of morality and beauty, often without a second thought as to where that monster could have came from and how it became what it is. Right or wrong, for better or for worse, monsters are treated as societal outcasts, destined to a life of either accepting their social status or spending their entire lives trying to fight that stigma. There are a few characters I can think of that fit the bill of a monster better than Mugen from Samurai Champloo. Samurai Champloo is a very diverse series. It evokes a variety of different emotions from the viewer in its 26-episode run. But there's a pertinent element of tragedy in many of the scattered tales the three main characters experience in their journey. In regards to which episode is the most tragic, there are plenty of worthy candidates, but in my opinion, the most tragic episode of Samurai Champloo is the episode that illuminates the painful backstory of the show's most beloved character and its most violent monster. A story called Misguided Miscreants. Okay, so yeah, Misguided Miscreants is technically 2 episodes, but really it's just one story told in 2 parts, so fuck it. I'm considering it 1 episode for the sake of this video. Cool? Cool. I've already made a pair of other Champloo videos discussing the other 2 members of the Champloo trio, Fu and Jean, so I figured I might as well finish out the Holy Trinity with an essay about the unofficial mascot of the series, Mugen. In the intro, I called Mugen a monster, and that's definitely an apt label for him. But just because he's a horrible and deplorable person doesn't mean he's not an amazing character that's very easy to root for in pretty much every episode. I once had a college professor tell me that the best characters in fiction are usually broken or unstable people who just happen to be really good at a certain thing. Think Dr. House from the show House, or Walter White from Breaking Bad. Even a character like Mob from Mob Psycho 100 fits this description as someone with crippling social awkwardness who also happens to be the most powerful psychic force in the world. Mugen, whether you believe it or not, is the same type of character. Mugen is a vulgar, violent, impulsive, depraved, undisciplined, and morally bankrupt character. All traits that you would normally assign to a bad person or a monster. From just the first few episodes, you can tell that there's clearly something off about him. But man, is it fun to watch him beat a motherfucker's ass.
Now that, in my expert opinion, is an ass whooping.
Much like the other characters in Samurai Champloo, Mugen is a much more complex character than what he might appear to be on the surface. And that, in part, is what makes him so intriguing. Watching Mugen ruthlessly chop down grunts, harass pretty women, and live a life of constant hedonistic, mindless self-indulgence makes the viewer wonder, what kind of shit has this man been through to make him like this? Well, let's dive into the story of his dark and humble beginnings. The first part of Misguided Miscreants is the 13th episode of Samurai Champloo, which means that it basically kicks off the second half of the series. The first 12 episodes of Champloo lay the groundwork and set the foundation of who these characters are, the world that they operate in, and their basic motivations and backstories. The second half is where we get all the juicy details of those elements. That basically means that at this point in the series, the viewer doesn't really know much at all about Mugen's backstory. We know he's a crazy, immature badass, but we have no real clue about what made him that way. The episode begins on a dark and eerie scene on the ocean in a large shipping boat. The crew of the boat start to panic and run for their lives as a horde of pirates come aboard and set literally everything on fire, as pirates do. The scene ends with a member of the crew begging for his life as a large figure sporting a headband from an early 2000s urban fashion catalog simply smiles, then shoves a live grenade into the pleading man's mouth before making his exit through the fire and flames. This man's name is Mukuro, and he's one of the most vicious and bloodthirsty characters in the entire show. The story picks up with Mugen, Jin, and Fu wandering through a tropical forest until they eventually find the ocean. It's here where they get ambushed by a group of goons and are forced to defend themselves. Well, Fu gets caught in a big fishing net, but Mugen and Jin are forced to defend themselves. Right when the goons seem to have the group cornered, Mukuro shoots a bullet into the air and approaches Mugen. It turns out that Mugen and Mukuro are actually old acquaintances from their childhood on the Ryukyu's islands, but they're not exactly friendly. Mukuro offers Mugen one last job. He tells Mugen it will be the biggest heist they've ever done, but Mugen declines and walks away from the devilish man. When Mugen storms off, Fu chases after him, but so too does another girl who was actually with the pirates. Her name is Koza, and she will be drastically important to this story. Shortly after, we find out that Mukuro and Koza are actually brother and sister, and they all grew up with Mugen together on the Ryukyu's islands, which are islands placed off the coast of Japan where people with criminal records were sent to live by the Japanese government. So, sorta like Australia, but without the funny accents and crocodiles. Koza goes on to describe life on the islands as akin to growing up in hell. She also mentions that she wishes that her brother Mukuro was dead. Unfortunately for her, she also admits that she needs him alive because she knows that without him, she could never survive on her own. From this conversation, Fu and the viewer realize that there seems to be much more to Mugen's past than previously thought. We then get a flashback to Mugen as a kid, being forced to jump to his death for crimes against the state, crimes that Mukuro also participated in but is allowing Mugen to take the rap for. This is our first insight into the strange relationship of crime and betrayal that Mugen shares with Mukuro. Through some creative means involving preying on Mugen's own insecurities about the type of person he's destined to be, and a friendly game of chicken, Mukuro convinces Mugen to take him up on his offer and help him with the heist. One of my favorite American expressions is calling somebody a crab in a bucket.
Fascinating creature, the crab. Got that hard exterior, but he ain't really dangerous, except to another crab. Dumb as all hell. Can't even walk straight. Matter of fact, the only thing a crab is good for is holding back other crabs. A crab don't want to see another crab make it.
Yeah, I guess.
Crab is like, if I'm gonna die, we all gonna die. I admire that. We all gotta die sometimes. Might as well help each other get there.
And if you're confused by any of what I just explained, just know that Mukuro is one of the most crab in a bucket ass motherfuckers I have ever seen in an anime. But after this, Mugen has a talk with Koza on the shore of the beach. As they look up at the stars together, Mugen plays aloof when Koza starts trying to reminisce and get cozy with him. Even if Koza does have feelings for Mugen, and even if he might have some similar feelings as well, Mugen knows that deep down he's sadly not the guy for that kind of life, and he, yet again, walks off when things start to get heavy. The rain begins to fall, and that night, the heist goes into action. Everything is going according to plan until... Turns out the whole plan was just a setup by Mukuro and his man on the inside named Shirin to simultaneously kill all of their own men and take the money for themselves. Part 1 ends with Fu, Koza, and Jin looking on in horror as the ship that Mugen was on explodes in the middle of the sea. Kind of a weird thought at this very dramatic and sad scene, but it's kind of nice to see that Fu and Jin show concern for Mugen's well-being, considering that at this point in the show, Mugen and Jin still plan on killing each other, and none of them really know much about the others. The ending of part 1 shows that they are genuinely starting to care about each other, and are no longer just sticking together out of convenience or a sense of duty. Part 2 kicks off with one of the most amazing sequences I have ever seen, and no matter how many times I watch it, I still get chills to this day whenever I see it. It's this incredible mashup that beautifully illustrates Mugen slowly drowning from the explosion on the boat, while also showing flashbacks of how Mugen first met Mukuro, and also how he survived jumping off of a cliff all those years ago. All of this is intercut with these fascinating symbolic images of realistic birds and deities of death following Mugen everywhere. And playing under all of this is this haunting yet pristine sounding ancient Japanese spiritual song that echoes in the background. This episode is worth watching just for this 5 to 6 minute sequence alone. It's one of my favorite moments from Champloo, hands down. And from this flashback, you really see an insight into the pain and suffering that many impoverished people have to endure. And you also get a glimpse into the mentality that a lot of people who grew up in these dangerous environments seem to develop over time. It's a ruthless mentality of being ready and willing to do anything and everything to escape that environment or conquer that environment as fast as possible, even if that means hurting other people, no matter how close they may be to you. After this amazing sequence, Koza asks Jin to kill Mukuro for her, and Jin, still dealing with the fresh wound of Mugen's betrayal and murder, quickly agrees. Meanwhile, Fu desperately searches for Mugen along the shore, until she finds a fisherman that has accidentally captured him in his net. And surprise, surprise, the crazy bastard is still alive.
Still alive!
And while all of that is happening, off in a secret cave somewhere, Mukuro meets with Shirin to discuss how they're going to handle all the loot that they stole from the ship. It's in this scene that you see the depths of how far everyone involved in this heist was willing to go. They all had so many different plans of who they would use and manipulate to get what they wanted that it's actually a little bit confusing to keep track of who actually played who and who was planning on betraying who, and it's too much for me. But basically just know, all these motherfuckers are shady pieces of shit, and they deserve what they get in the end. Kinda. Jin eventually finds and kills Mukuro, but before he dies, Mukuro realizes that Koza was the one who set him up, and he tells Jin that she had been playing him, Fu, and Mugen as well. It's only then when Jin realizes that Koza had fled with Shirin out of a back exit, and it's on his way back to Fu that Jin finds Mugen limping his way around the village, probably looking for revenge on Mukuro. He tells Mugen that he already killed Mukuro, and explains that Koza was actually the mastermind behind everything. Mugen then sets out on a different journey, and he eventually finds Koza and Shirin as they're happily walking off into the sunset together. And in an incredibly tense ending scene, thanks in large part to the crazy drum-heavy background music that plays while all of this happens, Mugen proceeds to brutally murder Shirin right in front of Koza. But as he approaches Koza, she drops to her knees and begs for Mugen to end her life as well. But Mugen simply limps past her without an ounce of emotion in his face, and we never see her again. And that's how the episode ends. It ends with countless dead bodies, no money gained, all hope lost, and the only possible catharsis is that the only two people who did survive go their separate ways as equally lonely and broken casualties of the corrupt and unforgiving world that they were both unjustly born into. In my opinion, it's the most bleak and tragic ending in Champloo, not just for how depressing it is in the moment, but for what it means for Mugen and even Koza going forward. Their lives are ruined by this. This is basically the only time in Samurai Champloo that we see anyone from Mugen's childhood. These were his closest and for a long time his only friends in the world. And look what they did to him. Mukuro tried to have him set up and killed twice. And Koza was the closest thing to a real romantic relationship that Mugen's ever had. And she completely used and betrayed him for her own benefit. It might be weird to consider at first, but in my opinion, Mugen is just as tragic of a character, if not more tragic of a character, as Fu or Jin, despite how they may come across on the surface. And this episode is the fittingly tragic display of all of that. I said it many times throughout this video. Mugen is a monster. He's an objectively horrible and damn near irredeemable scumbag of a person. He's vulgar, violent, impulsive, depraved, undisciplined, and morally bankrupt. But by the end of this episode, it's almost impossible not to feel bad for him. Everything he's been through and suffered through made him become the sick and twisted man that he is. And as fun of a character as he is to watch on the screen, whenever I find myself reveling in the crazy and unpredictable things Mugen does, there's always that little voice in the back of my head that says, wait, this guy is actually kind of fucked up. Misguided Miscreants is the episode that allows Mugen's character to work so well, because it excellently illustrates how this monster came to be. Most monsters are molded into their monstrous form. They're very rarely, if ever, just born that way. There are countless people in the real world just like Mugen, people expressing their trauma through violence and debauchery. And while it's easy to judge or even hate those people for their horrible actions, it's harder but much more important to try to be as understanding and sympathetic towards them as possible. Many of us have had people in our lives that have helped us when we needed it most, and that assistance played a large part in shaping us into better people. Maybe some of the monsters that we see every day need the same kind of assistance, a helping hand rather than a pointed finger. Just a small amount of grace and sympathy can do more than you might think. And it might be all someone needs to turn that corner and be a little bit less of a monster.